And thank you for joining. It's our webinar, the Afterschool Alliance webinar, how out-of-school time programs can help families claim the expanded tax credit. And we are presenting this webinar today in coordination with some wonderful partners, the Coalition for Human Needs, the Partnership for America's Children, the Boys and Girls Clubs of America, the National Afterschool Association, the YMCA of the USA, and Afterschool All-Stars. So I'd like to thank all of those partners. And we invite you to take a quick poll as we begin our webinar today. So again, thank you all for joining. You'll take a moment and answer our quick poll. I'd like to see how many of your programs have helped in the past to connect families to any of the following resources. All right, thank you all for participating. If you can see the poll on your screen, give it another minute. Okay, thank you. And I wanted to ask one more quick question. So one more poll we'll put up. And again, just take a moment and answer on the screen whether you are specifically familiar with the child tax credit for the 2020 tax year and how familiar you are. Is this something that you're a little bit familiar with? Know from personal experience, but haven't yet supported others in the field? Is it something you've read about or something that you feel relatively well informed about and are ready to go? All right. So thank you all for those polls. We definitely have a good mix of people here who've done a number of different types of support and have a range of experience. So I believe that this can be a really interesting webinar for all of us. I do want to thank you again for participating in the webinar and the poll, and mostly your work as a community partner. We do have a few housekeeping notes. Mainly would love for you to introduce yourself in the chat. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box or the Q&A. And we hope that you'll be active today in our programming. So the goal of today is really to ensure that out-of-school time programs, partners, and professionals are aware of the opportunity for those they serve to take advantage of the child tax credit and to access more of the funds that we know families need to do the important work of raising and supporting their developing children. So we did have that poll at the beginning, and we will have a poll at the end. And again, we would love for this to be interactive. So please engage with the chat. Tell your stories and ask your questions and make sure that this is useful for you. As often we hear teachers say, if you do have a question, somebody else probably has the same one. So it's very helpful to ask, and we have some wonderful experts here today to support the answers to those questions. And we'll have time to engage both during the webinar, but we'll also be reserving 15 minutes of question and answer at its conclusion. So in regards to so thank you. This is our agenda. And then in the next slide, in regards to the experts that we have today, we're joined by Julia Beebe, the Child Tax Credit Outreach Coordinator at the Coalition for Human Needs, who will present most of the information in this webinar. And we also have the good fortune to be joined by Deborah Weinstein, Executive Director at the Coalition for Human Needs, who will also be available to answer your questions in the chat and the Q&A. Their bios will both be available. Their bios will be available in the chat, and we are truly grateful for the work that they're doing at the Coalition and for their time here today. So on the next slide, because an issue like the child tax credit just has a range far beyond just the out-of-school time field, I wanted to just take a minute as we start and before Julia begins to frame why this credit is so intimately connected to much of what we do as an after-school field. And even before that, I really just want to begin by providing all the providers and programs on this webinar with a huge thank you. We know the last 2 years have been exceedingly challenging in every way one can imagine, and even those areas we couldn't have imagined. And you've continually stepped up to serve children, families, and communities. And we thank you for that. So on the next slide, what we see is even more amazing is that during the continued pandemic, many programs weren't and still aren't just doing the work of providing wonderful programming and support for their youth. They're going above and beyond and using their positions as trusted community partners to help connect families with additional resources. We've done 6 waves of surveys and programs since the pandemic began and found that nearly 7 in 10 providers are either connecting families with community resources or planning to. For For those of you on this webinar, your interest today places you squarely in this section. And again, we really can't thank you enough and hope that you continue to open lines of communication with us so we can continue to support and find support for the work that you do. On the next slide, what I really find both interesting and exciting about the expanded tax credit is that after-school programs as community partners can help support families to connect with the credit, but also in many ways, the credit can be a means of supporting programs. In a survey of how parents were planning to use their additional tax credits, you wouldn't be surprised that many families plan to use these funds right away on basics and essentials like food, housing, and immediate needs. But what I'd like to note is that 40% of families overall, and even higher percentages of middle and lower income families, plan to use at least some of the credit on child enrichment activities. On the next slide, thanks, Sarah. So as a field, we really know how important that extra funding can be to narrowing opportunity gaps in our children's lives. And while we at the Afterschool Alliance and throughout the country advocate as much as possible for public investment in after-school and summer programs, we still know that 77% of parents are paying parent fees to participate in these programs and opportunities. And we know that high-income parents have an easier ability to afford those fees, spending over 5 times as much as lower-income families. Next slide. So supporting families to ensure they can access this tax credit is really doubly meaningful. 1, it helps every household to have more money to operate, but 2, it can help a family who could only afford to send a child to after school 2 days a week to maybe add 1 extra day, or to support a child who couldn't participate at all to begin to have enrichment during their out of school hours. So it'd be great if every family could be aware of and access this money that's waiting there for them to claim it. And every child could benefit from a household with a little extra financial support. And with that, I just want to pass it off to Julia for her important presentation and our rich discussion today about ensuring families know about and can take advantage of this opportunity. So thank you. Pass it off to Julia.
Great. Thank you so much, Jillian, and really appreciate kind of laying out why this is so important for all of you on this call today and families that you're all working with. So really appreciate that introduction. I think we could go to the next slide, please. I'm here, my name is Julia Beebe, and we'll be joined by my colleague, the Executive Director of the Coalition on Human Needs, Deborah Weinstein, shortly during the Q&A, but we're here with the Coalition on Human Needs and Partnership for America's Children, 2 organizations that are doing advocacy work at the national level and in some cases the state level for families and children. And specifically, we're here today to talk about the expanded child tax credit. I think we can go to the next slide, please, and maybe the following as well. And the following. Great, thank you. So many of you, especially working with youth over the years, have likely heard of the child tax credit before. But in 2021, last year, the American Rescue Plan Act expanded the child tax credit. And with this expansion, it's projected that it could cut the number of kids experiencing poverty by about 40%. It's projected to lift approximately 1.1 million children above half the poverty line. And so, I think Jillian laid this out really well, but the impacts are really far reaching, and that's where all of you come in and all of us as members of the community to make sure we can connect families to this critical benefit. I think we can go to the next one. So with the 2021 expansion, the child tax credit, or CTC, became, it means more money, and it also means that more families are eligible. So these are a few of the ways that it was expanded last year. First, and many of you may have heard of this, families were eligible to receive half of the child tax credit last year through monthly payments, and then could get the remaining half this year during tax season. And we'll talk soon about how families can claim that second half or the full amount if they didn't receive the first half. And the amount of the credit went up as did the age of children eligible. So for families with kids under 6, they can get $3,600 per child and $3,000 for children between the ages of 6 and 17. And there's not a cap on the number of children. So if a family has 3 or 4 children, this would be per child depending on their age. A really significant part of the credit, and really what results in those projections of reducing poverty so much, is that the credit, there is no minimum income to be eligible for this credit. So a family can have no or very low income, and the credit's fully refundable, which means that a family is entitled to that full $3,000 or $3,600, whether or not they have they owe any taxes and whether they've made any income, meaning that families with the lowest or no income will get this benefit. I think, yeah, perfect. And so just to sort of, I don't think we need to tell you why this is so important, but important just to sort of explain the amount of money on the table, that in the example of a family with one adult and 3 kids, ages 4, 13, and 15, they would be entitled to receive almost $10,000 through the 2021 child tax credit. And that could increase if they claimed any unclaimed stimulus payments or other tax credits that they might be eligible for. The next slide, please. I think Jillian spoke to this, but I did want to include this here, that we know from last year's monthly payments how families have been using this. And it's been on kind of the basics for their kids and their households. Food was a #1 item, but as Jillian said, families were also spending on after-school programs, tutoring and recreation, school expenses, and a number of other items that I think certainly with after-school program, but maybe also recreation, really intersect with the programs that you all are part of. You can go to the next slide, please. So this is I'm really excited to be here today because of the timing. Tax season actually opened last Monday, or the Monday before rather, on January 24th. And so now is really the time to be helping families claim this credit. So this is incredibly timely. As I said, many families, the vast majority, automatically were receiving monthly payments in advance starting last July. But for families who didn't get those monthly payments, they now have the opportunity to file a tax return and get the full amount. And if they did get those payments, they can get the second half when they file a tax return. And, I think one thing that's important to know is I think a lot of families who don't, they maybe heard of the child tax credit before and don't know about the expansion and assume they're not eligible. And they maybe have also been hearing about what's happening or not happening at the congressional level. It is important to note that Congress must enact an extension of the expanded CTC, or it won't be continuing in its form right now. But the 2021 credit, which families can claim through this tax season, is money on the table to which families are entitled right now. So I think there's a lot of advocacy work and storytelling that needs to happen, but the good news and sort of the focus of today's training is that you all can help families claim money that is available currently. We can go to the next slide, please. The major challenge in ensuring that people are actually getting this credit is that there are an estimated 4 million or more kids who are really at risk of missing out on the CTC. And that's because their families have no or very low incomes, and so they may not have a tax filing obligation and really haven't filed taxes maybe ever or recently. And so they are very much at risk of missing out on this. And we know that children of color were disproportionately excluded from the benefits of the full CTC before the expansion and are still more likely to miss out on it without our outreach. And we know from experience, and this is probably unsurprising to everyone here, that really the best way to connect families to this benefit is through trusted community messengers who can let folks know about this credit and let them know where they can get tax support. And I'll say upfront right now, I'm not a tax expert. None of you have to be tax experts in order to claim this credit. And we're going to talk through how that's how you can go ahead and help families claim it. The next slide, please. And we can go to the next one. So who's eligible for the expanded CTC? Adults who have a social security number or an individual taxpayer identification number, or ITIN, can claim it, which means that if a parent is undocumented, if they have an ITIN, they can still claim children through this credit. The children do have to have social security numbers, though. The dependent doesn't have to be someone's biological or kind of their own kid, or even they don't have to necessarily be the legal guardian, but they do have to be one of the in this category. So their child, grandchild, stepchild, younger sibling, etc., or a foster child placed with a government agency. And that dependent must have been living with the adult in the US for more than 6 months of the year. So as long as the person has one of these relationships and was with them for 6 months and a day, then the adult can claim them. The dependent can't have provided half of their own support last year, and a child must be considered a dependent for tax filing purposes. One thing is probably worth noting here is that 90% of children are eligible. So the vast majority of kids are eligible for this credit. And so it's really worth amplifying this with many families. As I mentioned, most families were receiving monthly advance credits last year, but families who were not required to file taxes in the last couple of years or faced other barriers in doing so had to take proactive measures in order to get those advance credits. I think what's most important to know right now is that everyone will need to file tax returns this year, whether they're claiming the second half or the full amount, that $3,000 to $3,600 per child. And we think that groups like yours and out of school time programs can really help families understand why they should file and help direct them to support doing so. Next slide, please. This is just a little bit of a timeline. As I mentioned, the tax season began last Monday. VITA sites, volunteer income tax assistance sites, that can help families in person as well as virtually with their tax filings are opening now. You probably are familiar with the April 18th deadline for filing a tax return or requesting an extension, but it's important to note that those whose earnings are kind of sufficiently low or they don't have earnings that are not required to file taxes don't have that April 18th deadline. So while we want to help them get money as soon as possible, they can, in theory, continue to apply for this credit in the months after the tax filing deadline. In April, we also know that there's going to be a simplified online filing portal that opens, and this will be a way for people who aren't required to file taxes but can get benefits doing so to do so without going through the full tax filing process. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. And we know that that portal will close in fall 2022. Great. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the free tax assistance available and what I mentioned on the last slide. The VITA sites are really all over the country. And I think if someone can click this link, we can actually just show you how you could use this link to find a local VITA site. Tira, I don't know if you're willing to put in a random zip code just to sort of give a sense to everyone. So this would give a list of all the local sites in your area. And if you click on any one, maybe number 5, yeah, that's great. It will tell you the address, the open schedule, if the schedule is up, if appointments are required, languages, and a phone number. And we really encourage, if you're going to be offering this to families that you work with, calling in advance just to make sure that the information here is accurate. And if you are hoping to create materials or trainings to get families to these sites, we're happy to help you identify kind of the local information. But this would be the best website to go to find this information at the national level. And this is also, it's also available in Spanish if you click there, so that's great. I think we can go back to the main slide. And so those are in-person assistance. We know that people may or may not want to do get in-person support filing tax returns. So if they go, oh, sorry, if you could just go back to the other one quickly. The last slide, perfect. They can also use this Get Your Refund tool, which was created in collaboration with the IRS to access free do-it-yourself filing services or to get free virtual tax filing assistance with phone support from a local VITA support volunteer. I also mentioned before that there will be a simplified portal for those without a filing obligation that will open in April. And so people can go to this website and sign up to be notified when that becomes available. We've been getting questions from groups about what's the best advice to be giving people. And we think the clearest advice for most people is that you should file a full tax return now. That is the best way of making sure you get this money sooner rather than later. And we know families need this support. And it also ensures that families get all the tax benefits and credits to which they're entitled that you may not get through simplified filing. We know that for some people, though, they might run into barriers with the full filing, perhaps getting certain documents. And so then that would be, you can point them to this website where they can be notified when this portal opens after April 18th. And we'll be offering other trainings and providing materials as sort of a second round of outreach once the formal tax filing season closes and this portal opens. But Thierry, if you don't mind just clicking on the Get Your Refund main page, if you go to Get Started, just so folks have a sense of what this looks like, you'll sort of have these options of getting help. That first option is the one that would allow you to do it with phone support. The second is do it yourself. And the third is the option that opens in April. And again, this is also in Spanish. So I encourage people to kind of play around with it. It's a pretty simple webpage. It did launch on Monday. And again, this is in partnership with the IRS. So you may notice some changes to it in the coming weeks. Thanks so much. And I think we can go to the next slide. There is other tax assistance, including low-income taxpayer clinics, and this is a locator. They can help if an individual with low or moderate income is in a tax dispute with the IRS. I definitely recommend reaching out to places before referring people to determine what they can support with. But in the example of the child tax credit, we know there are sometimes kind of custody-related concerns, and they may be able to represent taxpayers in any proceedings connected to the IRS. Great, I think we can go to the next slide. There are many free services available. We know some people that won't be accessible to everyone, and some people may choose to take advantage of paid tax services. And so I just recommend that anyone who's sort of working in communities where people might be using paid services, especially in immigrant communities and refugee communities, where folks might seek preparers out who speak the same language and there's a certain kind of cultural affinity, that it is important to look out for certain red flags and be wary of preparers who are advertising sort of the biggest return possible, as this can lead to difficulty for the taxpayer down the road. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but in our toolkit and in this presentation, there's a link from the IRS of things that people can be aware of and kind of questions they can ask before they start working with a paid tax preparer. And that link is available in Spanish and in other languages as well. We can go to the next slide. So I had mentioned that for parents or adults who are claiming children who may be undocumented or don't have otherwise don't have a social security number, they can claim this credit using an ITIN, an individual taxpayer identification number. And this is generally a two-step process in which families have to prepare an ITIN application and get certain documents certified and then file an application with the tax return. Unfortunately, not all VITA sites help with this. And so many people sort of work on the application and then can send in the application when it's ready with their tax return. And there's a very, unfortunately, a pretty significant backlog on ITIN applications. And so it does take some time. And one way to get this done is to actually send in your personal documents. And we don't recommend doing this because we know people don't want or can't be away from kind of their most important personal documents for weeks or even months at a time. But there are in-person options, including IRS taxpayer assistance centers that can help get copies certified for their ITIN application. And I've put a locator in here. These are not available everywhere. I would say they're available in a lot of major cities, but if you're working in a certain community and trying to figure out the best place to point people, and this isn't an option, we'll provide our emails at the end and definitely welcome you to reach out, and we can help try to connect you with the right local partners. Great, I think we can go to the next slide. So here's a list of required tax documents to file if you don't mind clicking on that. We won't go through all of these, but this is just a list, and in our toolkit, it's also available in Spanish. One thing to note is that for in-person VITA filing, tax filing, you do have to bring the actual Social Security card or the verification letter, or the equivalent for an ITIN. So we know that might be challenging for some families, and it's something we just want to be communicating to people before they go to a VITA site. So definitely making sure they have this checklist in advance is important. Great, thanks so much. And this is, we'll include this all in the follow-up. So if you have any questions, then you can definitely reach out. Okay, if we go to the next slide. There are some additional credits that Jillian asked that I mention, and so I'll go through these quickly, but there's the expanded, on the next slide, the expanded earned income tax credit. I won't go into this a lot, but it basically means more people who are working are eligible for this credit, now including people between the ages of 19 and 24, and those 65 and older who don't have kids at home and may not usually file taxes. So again, if someone goes to file a tax return, this would be another potential credit that they could be claiming in the order of several thousands of dollars. We go to the next slide. Another credit is a child and dependent care credit. And I believe, Jillian, you had mentioned that different groups were asking about this one. Yet another reason to point people to tax assistance, because someone can help them make sure that they're getting all the credits to which they're entitled, not just the child tax credit. And this one allows people to actually get money back for out-of-pocket expenses. And it's pretty broad for childcare and includes before and after school care programs, which I would think would be particularly relevant for this audience. So this is a way that families can be getting support with some of the money that they might be paying for these types of programs. Great, and if you go to the next one. Unfortunately with EITC, the Earned Income Tax Credit, individuals have to have Social Security numbers. They don't have to be US citizen, but they will need an SSN. But with the Child and Dependent Care tax credit, people, both the adult and the children, just need an ITIN or a Social Security number. So that is slightly broader in who is eligible as far as immigration status. Perfect. So I think we might not go through all of these because I would like to leave more time for questions, but these are some of the common questions that have emerged. If we want to go to the next slide. Just quickly, one of the questions that you might all be wondering that we get often is, does receiving the CTC impact other public benefits? And no, this will not change any federally funded public benefits like SNAP or WIC that families are already receiving. Go to the next one. Another big question that we've been hearing, and I think this came up in our conversation for this call, was, will people have to pay back this money? The CTC is not a loan, and so I think because it was called advance payments last year, that sort of confused people. It's not a loan, so it doesn't have to be paid back. There is some question about if the number of dependents they have changes or their income drastically increases, would they have to pay it back? And while there are certain situations in which they would, those who make under $80,000 as a single person or $120,000 filing jointly are protected from having to pay it back. We can go to the next one. Again, people might be wondering if, what happens if they haven't filed in the past, and we won't go through all this text, but I think it's important to kind of emphasize with individuals who are asking that if they didn't have income or it was low, they may not have had any obligation to file. And even if they did, there's generally not a penalty if the IRS owes them money. And in fact, if they file tax returns retroactively for past 3 years, they can actually get the refunds to which they're entitled. And if they do owe money, then there are ways that this child tax credit will actually go toward paying off the what they do owe. And so obviously we understand every situation is unique, but there can be benefits long-term in beginning to pay that back, or hopefully paying it back entirely. We do know that there's a set of immigration related questions specifically. And so no, the CTC won't under current law does not impact someone's ability to get a green card. People are very familiar with the public charge concept that can impact green card applications, and that getting the CTC is not included in proceedings for getting a green card. I think we can go to the next slide. Another important note is there's been a lot of questions about confidentiality, and the IRS is forbidden, except for some possible exceptions, in sharing an individual's taxpayer information with other agencies. And so if someone's concerned, either because of their own status or if someone in their home, they should know that this information is highly confidential. Great. So I know that was a lot of information and there might be a lot more questions. All of this is, well, maybe not all of it, but hopefully most of this, your questions are addressed in our toolkit, including in the frequently asked questions. And I think, perfect, someone just put it in the chat. And I think we can go to the next section. Keep going here. I just wanted to touch kind of briefly here at the end on the type of outreach that your organizations may be able to engage in. And the toolkit we'll share is really aimed at helping all of you connect families to this credit and making that as easy as possible, because we know that you all have a lot on your plate. So what we have learned about child tax credit outreach is that it works best when it's integrated into existing programs and communications, when families receive information in languages they speak in different ways, multiple times from trusted sources. Outreach must include clear referral info, and so that's why we've provided the info for local VITA sites. And if you're sending out messages to families or putting out a flyer and you're trying to figure out the right referral, we're happy to help you figure that out. And we find that it's helpful to put out kind of broad communication and then maybe more targeted follow-up with those who are more likely to be eligible. I think we can go to the next slide. We've also learned that school districts and government benefit agencies who are already communicating to many families who may be eligible are very trusted sources of information. And I think it's, you know, many of the groups represented on this call and within this network are also places that are regularly communicating with families or with their children. These are trusted sources of information, and families really might look to you for clarity on this. We found that text messages really work best for communicating to families, but it really depends on how you all already communicate to the families you work. So whether that's robocalls or emails or mailers. And in our toolkit, we have samples of all of this. And we know that sometimes, in addition to sort of trusted community messengers, families will want to hear from tax and immigration or family law attorneys. And again, if anyone here is interested in making those connections locally, we're happy to try to help. I think we can go to the next slide. And maybe go to the next slide as well. So these are just sample text messages that our partners at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities has created. And these are really simple. They refer people to get your refund. And we found these types of messages to be very effective. So these are in our toolkit if anyone wants to send these out. And we do have messages like this coming in 11 languages, hopefully in the next week or two. So please do check back in our toolkit often for updates. And I think if you go to the next slide, this is a sample, you know, if someone's on a hold, like waiting on hold for an agency, this can be a recorded script. On the next slide, there are posters and flyers, including customizable ones, and these are all in the toolkit we're providing. So these are kind of simple things that you can hand out, and get your refund is a clear referral for where you can find kind of local tax assistance or online or over the phone. But if you all know groups that are doing it locally, you can also customize it and put in the appropriate referral. I think on the next slide, kind of adding CTC related questions to existing intake forms. So if you're doing an intake with a family, it could be easy to say, you know, do you file taxes and potentially get benefits from that? And here's a local referral. And also making sure that included in any resort packets that are going home with families and children, adding flyers and FAQs, including those we've included in the toolkit. Some of you might have good relationships with local, county, or state benefits agencies, and we think encouraging them, they often have lists of tens or even hundreds of thousands of beneficiaries. This is a really easy way to get out the message to many people, including many low-income folks who may be eligible. And so we're working on a second toolkit specifically for agencies, but if you know that there's someone that you work with that might be open to this, so we would love to brainstorm with you about how to make that happen. Social media is another option. And again, all of this that we're putting here is also in our toolkit available for you. I think we can go to the next slide. Those are all kind of lighter lifts. We know that some groups might want to take an extra step in really connecting families to this credit. So they might want to be calling or conducting peer-to-peer texting. They might want to hold a virtual or in-person Q&A with a tax specialist or an immigration attorney or other subject matter expert. Some families might want to help schedule VITA appointments. So while families might be comfortable doing this on their own, they might want support and need support. There are ways of working in collaboration with local tax site partners to make these sites really accessible as far as language and childcare and location. And some organizations may even want to host tax prep events or help make sure that that list of documents I showed before is ready to go when people do go to their appointment. So these are all sort of examples of the type of outreach you could all be doing with the families you're working with. And in our toolkit, which is linked here and I think in the chat, and I'm sure we'll go out in the follow-up email to registrants, we have all of the materials we just showed. So outreach materials, including flyers and mailers and posters, frequently asked questions, currently in English and Spanish, social media toolkit, sample text messages and calls and hold lines. We're working on an entire set for immigrant families. There's also focus group findings for those who are really kind of interested in the messaging. And so all of this is in our toolkit, and we really encourage you to take a look at that and let us know what's helpful, what's missing. We're working to get a lot of this translated, and we know that's often people's first question. And you'll see in the toolkit in red those things that are already available in Spanish, but we'll be making more resources available in more languages shortly. I think if we go to the next slide, I think this will also go in the chat, but this is our listserv. So if you're wondering about upcoming trainings and resources, you can sign up, and we send about weekly updates with any trainings and resources. And people might also want to know what's really landing with their outreach. Are flyers better than text messages? Is a Q&A on Zoom better than in person? So if you're interested in kind of tracking how people who interact with your communications and activities actually access the Get Your Refund site, there is a way of creating a unique URL with our partners at Code for America, which created the site. And I'm happy to help you set that up if you email me. And then one other thing I wanted to add here before we turn to question and answers is that next Tuesday, February 8th, is actually Child Tax Credit and Earned Income Tax Credit Awareness Day. And so hundreds of organizations, including ours across the country, are partnering to really make sure that families know this is happening and that they can start to claim this credit now. And we're partnering with the White House on this as well. And this form, which I think will go in the chat, is a way for your organization to see some easy activities that you can do between now and April 18th to help put out the word to families. And so you'll see an option in there of, does your organization want to send out text messages or send out flyers or help people prepare their tax documents? And it allows you to choose the things that you want to commit to do, and also indicate if you would like our support in doing any of these. The White House will be sort of listing these types of efforts and announcing them on the Awareness Day on Tuesday. And so if you're interested in being included in those White House announcements and announcements of different national activities, please do fill out this form really ASAP by tomorrow. They're moving at a fast pace, but you'll have the opportunity on the form to indicate if you would like to be included in the White House part of this. And even if not, you're welcome to make a commitment and indicate how you want our support apart from everything happening on Tuesday, and we'll be following up with you. And I think, Jillian, you wanted to mention, I think this is great, that there's also a federal government website that's in our toolkit and perhaps in the chat, childtaxcredit.gov, which has further resources, and you'll see that right in our toolkit. So I've talked a lot, and I would like to pause and kind of hear from folks, and I want to welcome Deb Weinstein, who's our ED at the Coalition on Human Needs, to join. And I'm not sure, Jillian, if you'll also be back, and we would love to just answer any questions that are coming in and do our best to address them.
Great, thank you so much, Julia. That was enormously comprehensive. And thank you, Deb, for being here to answer all the questions in the Q&A. I want to give people on the webinar a time to process and look through some of the great resources that you shared, but also please feel free to ask any questions now. And then also, I know that we shared Julia's email, and as your work in this space continues, feel free to access that. It seems like there are a lot of great opportunities. I just wanted to ask kind of a question to start. And one of the things that I was wondering is if a family does get referred to in one of these VITA sites and they, let's say, are not eligible or have other tax issues, what kind of experience might they have if I'm a program that refers that family?
Do you want to take that, Deb?
Well, I think that there could be issues with VITA sites being overbooked, essentially. And also you have to have an income below a certain level to qualify. And I have to admit, I don't have that at my fingertips, what that is, but I thought it might be in the neighborhood of like 60,000. It isn't rock bottom. So it's possible, but I think that if the people go to getyourrefund.org, they will be given a number of different resources. So if the first site they try can't take them, there may be another site that could. There's also the getyourrefund.org gives kind of 3 options for free tax preparation help. One is going to an online site where if the people feel that they can do it, they do it without help. But they will also get prompts that if they're having trouble, they can then be connected with somebody who online could offer help. The second option is doing it online, but with help from the get-go. And that is, an extra option that's convenient for a lot of people. And the third is going in person to a site where they would be connected to a site that can take them. So it's likely that they can get help in this free manner. But the one additional thing that we've been saying is we have in our toolkit sort of do's and don'ts in terms of looking for paid tax prep help. And the IRS has put out something, what to watch for and what to be confident of. And yes, we want everybody to get the free tax preparation help if they can, but if that's really not available, it would be a lot better to pay some money and get, we're talking now of if a family has not claimed the credit at all yet, and they've got one 4-year-old and one 8-year-old, that's $66,000, right, Julia? My higher math here, $6,600. Forgive me. But that is a lot of money. And if they haven't, if they have filed to get the advance credits, they still get half of that by filing, and that's what we want. That's their money. If if somehow it just doesn't work out to get the free tax preparation help, it's still worth finding a reputable paid preparer, because you'll come out way ahead if you get that kind of money.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And it seems like Chiquita offered that the most VITA sites is about $58,000 is the income limit. So thank you for sharing that. And if people in the chat also have had experience with this work, we'd certainly love to hear and learn from that as well. But I did want to ask, so both of you mentioned when you were speaking some of the challenges, I think, with families that might speak different languages. So just curious, if you're a program provider and you know that some of your staff maybe do speak the language of those families, how can those staff help in this process to help families understand in their native language?
Julia,
I mean, yeah, I can start. I mean, this is such an important question. Obviously, without language access, none of this doesn't work. And so VITA sites do have access to interpreter lines, all VITA sites. However, not necessarily all of them have it. And so I do think if there's a program that knows they have a lot of X language, it's really worth calling the local VITA site and confirming if they have set up this interpreter line, and what, if they have this interpreter line, which will offer a wider range of languages. And also sometimes they have actual volunteers who speak multiple languages. And so I definitely recommend, we had a training last week in Colorado, for example, and we had specific languages and were able to call the VITA site and confirm that they had that capacity. One thing to note there, though, is that, and I think where program staff could be supportive, is even if when they show up, there's someone who speaks the language or an interpreter line, the person scheduling the appointment might not speak the language, and that can be sort of an immediate barrier. And so if possible, if there's someone who can kind of be on the phone and help make that appointment at the same time, or do that online with the person, then that sort of skips the initial confusion and allows someone to get in and get the services they need. I think also if there are situations where there's kind of a large community speaking a certain language, there might be ways to kind of coordinate with interpreters and with local VITA sites to really make that accessible. And that would be something we'd be really interested in supporting groups and thinking about, and figuring out how to make a site kind of accessible to as many people as possible. Not sure if you want to add anything, Deb.
No, I think there's a big effort being made to provide interpretation for people in multiple languages. We're not quite there yet, so a little bit of patience is needed. But we know almost in any language, the personal contact with someone to reassure people, to alert people that this is an opportunity for them, there's no replacing that. So if staff that speak the language of the people can tell them about what they can qualify for, and certainly that guidance that Julia just mentioned of maybe being with them when they make that appointment, having made the appointment, it is likely that with that advanced preparation, they can make the interpreting services available when the person comes in. So just doing that initial outreach and confidence building in the language that people speak is really vital.
Thank you so much. And I think maybe we'll just ask one more question, and then if there are any other questions that people will put in the chat or stories to share, we'll be sure to lift those up too. And so my final question is, I think sometimes when we talk about taxes or public policies, there's some sensitivity. If you're a program provider, what do you think is a good approach to communicate and open the door with families to start talking about their income or some of the, the personal details necessary to engage in this process while still, maintaining that friendly relationship?
Well, I can start just a little bit. Right, this is a highly sensitive topic, but on the other hand, about 90% of children in families in the United States qualify for this tax break. So it's something that all families, most families with children can benefit from. And that takes a little of the awkwardness away. You know, you're just telling people, you're not going to get into the details of what their income is, or of any of the other, you know, tax details. Really, your job is to say, hey, this is a benefit that most children and families can get. Are you getting your tax credit? And we did find in the messaging that when you say, you know, this is your tax credit, this is your help for your families, that people kind of like hearing it that way. So that's the role, to alert people that there is something that they can claim, and that it will be helpful. And the other part of what they can do is, of course, this getyourrefund.org. Here, connect up to the people who are the tax experts, who will, with complete confidentiality, help you fill out the form so you can get your tax credit. And that's pretty much what you have to do. In addition, it obviously helps them a lot if you can share some of the fact sheets, and in particular the list of the documents they might need. That'll smooth things a lot for them. But you don't have to be the tax expert. You don't have to get into their personal financial situation. You're alerting them to something that would really help them.
Thank you. I think that's a wonderful way to close our question and answer portion, is that main fact that we're, you know, our job is to just inform people of an opportunity that's already theirs for the taking. So Julia, thank you for that really clear explanation today of what the child tax credit is and ways that programs can help engage. And we're going to have this webinar available and on our website throughout tax season, and continue to share this. Deb, thank you for being here to answer questions and your continued availability as people navigate this space. I do want to end with one final poll just to get a sense of how people feel they might engage with the process. And then we'll put our emails up so that people can continue to communicate with us as tax season rolls forward. All right, so if people are participating, you can just answer our final poll, poll number 3. When you're done, press submit. All right, and then Tiara, when that poll is complete, we can put up our slide with our emails, and just encourage people as much as possible to, we know that you're busy, but to do whatever you can in this space, even if that just means talking to friends and family about what you heard or what's available, talking to other program providers. Just the more we communicate as a field, the more information we'll get out. And so we know that the work that you do is important every day, and that adding something like this to your plate seems like one additional challenge, and yet it's so important for our families and our communities. So the webinar will be able to be shared. It will be on our website. As Julia mentioned, we're going to send out to all the people who are on this webinar today, and to anybody who subscribed, the webinar slides, as well as additional resources like the toolkit. So please use this webinar again to share with friends and partners. And again, a big thank you to everybody who helped with this webinar and all the programs who took the time today and will continue taking the time to listen and do this work.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.